All right, welcome to it. Mono Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Liberty and Friends that comes to you, of course, on the Big Daddy Liberty channel every Sunday at 8 p.m. Welcome to it. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. Now, whether you're watching this simulcast on Facebook, YouTube, or on X, do me a solid favor, smash that like button. Yeah, we'll do it now. Hit that like button as that graphic goes off. I've grown rather accustomed to it now. But hit that like button whether you're watching on any of those mediums. And of course, if it is on YouTube, then please subscribe to the channel. Help me grow my numbers and reach my goal of 45,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And a quick reminder, as we are trying to sort out its gremlins for whatever reason, the website. Find it, please, at bigdaddyliberty.com. Now, with that being said, tonight's show, as always, on Liberty and Friends, involves a panel of thinkers, guys who are generally speaking on the center right of the equation. I hate that expression, but it's true. I'm talking about, moderate centrists, libertarians, conservatives, and of course, even the odd anarchist every now and then. They help us unpack the news week that was. And in tonight's show, we zoom in once again, perhaps for the last time, on this government of national unity. My goodness, what a ragtag mix it has been. And the question we're asking tonight is this government of national unity a bloated one? Are we seeing government in this country, and maybe around the world, expanding continuously at the expense of you, the ordinary citizen, the person who I like to describe as the faith, flag, family, and freedom type South African? Are you paying a heavy premium for politicians to have warm seats in the positions of government and power? What are the implications of government being this big and this expensive? Is Cyril Ramaphosa taking you for a, as I'll let you finish that particular statement, especially given in the week, the statement that was issued by the minister in the presidency, basically blaming you, dear voter, for the expanded cabinet. That's right. The politicians think you are to blame. How dare you vote out the ANC, they say. You're the reason why Cyril Cupcake Ramaphosa has had to expand this administration. My God, that sort of level of arrogance is what we're going to unpack here tonight with my panel, of course, from the Free Market Foundation, a chap who's no stranger to this channel. I'm talking, of course, about Martin van Staden and, of course, Nzuzo Kathi, one part of that trio from the ManPatria Podcast. Let me get these chaps up on screen. Fellas, good evening. Martin, how are you?
Hey, I'm well, thanks. And yourself, Sihle? Thanks for having me.
Excellent, my brother. Nzuzo, Baba, good evening.
Evening, Sihle, as well as Martin, as well as to your viewers. Great to be on the show after, quite a break.
It's been a while.
It's been a while. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Dude, it's good to have you on. Perhaps let's jump straight into it, because for me, it was that argument advanced by the office of the presidency, which I found completely insulting and really a slap in the face to a South African public right now who are, I can't think of the expression, but guys, we're sinking in debt as ordinary South Africans. We're struggling to make ends meet. And on top of that, there is a big, bloated, heavy, cumbersome government, which we are basically having money stolen from our pockets in order to fund these politicians. It's a very nice job if you can get one, these political jobs, Martin.
Yeah, look, it's actually ridiculous how little respect the so-called government has for its own citizens. I mean, it's the implication of what the minister in the presidency was saying is so sickening. It's like okay, so we voted for many more parties and the ANC has shrunk. But how they interpret that is that, well, we're going to keep the ANC's idea of government just as big as it is. And then we're going to add every other party's conception of government to that so that it gets bigger. So, yeah, it does make sense to say that given that you voted for more than one party, this is now a bigger government. I mean, it's such perverse logic. But it's nothing. It's disgusting. It's very disgusting, but it's not surprising because this is the type of kind of ride these people have taken us on for before. And the clear example of that is Ramaphosa having said some time ago that he's committed to cutting cabinet and this will happen and so on. And lo and behold, now that the ANC kind of lost 14%. Somehow the president now says now he can't stick to that promise. Now he has to have a bigger government. I mean, how much contempt must he have for people? I mean, it's simple. You don't need to add more ministers. You can take the number of ministers down to 15 and then still have enough seats to divvy up proportionally to what the parties got in the National Assembly. Any idiot knows this, but no, it would be too jarring to their statist sensibilities to do anything resembling sensible policy. So, yeah, it's outrageous, and I think we should continue to point out that it is outrageous. But if anyone is surprised, then we need to find out why they are surprised. Because I think Sigle, you and people like me and Nzuzo, I mean, we've been saying this for a very long time. This is just how it kind of works. And we need some fundamental kind of shift in political thinking in South Africa. Not partisan thinking, not ANC, DA, EFF, like really fundamental political thinking. We need a shift there to see this type of nonsense really come to an end.
I realize that I'm muted, but absolutely, Martin, I think you've laid out the fundamental problem at play here. And unfortunately, this is the part where perhaps people like you and I and Nzuzo are in a ideological minority in this country, insofar as most people, when they speak around a particular issue or problem in society, their de facto call is to say, what's government doing about this? The government should be doing this. The government should be doing that. And of course, because politicians, like any other person, respond to incentives, also adopt that very same language. And unfortunately, even parties like the DA, which are meant to be classical liberals or liberals, fall into that very same trap, where the belief generally, Nzuzo, I'm going to throw it to you, the belief generally is that if you don't promise more free goodies from government, if you don't therefore de facto expand the size of government in order to fund these free goodies, the same money that comes from the very taxpayer, but nonetheless, if you don't expand that same government, then you risk not attaining power in this country. Or at least that's the formula we've been told for a very long time. But it's simply a faulty logic, isn't it?
No, yeah, it is. Looking from the perspective of us as, censor riots, classical rebels, and even anarchists, we're always thinking limited government, people that are not involved in that. Whenever you have an issue, it shouldn't necessarily be deferred to the government, but rather, the community must be the one that actually takes responsibility in that respect. But, we're living in a country in which ultimately the history has shown that big government is what is wanted, is what is loved, and is what is needed. Unfortunately, that is the case, despite our many failures in that respect. But it seems as though when Ramaphosa implemented this cabinet, it was for purposes of ensuring that, as you say, everyone eats. Everyone is able to eat, whilst at the same time, I believe also that if you see at every single department, an ANC member is in that department to ensure that the ANC's policies are taken forward. So essentially, it's about let the other guys eat, fine, but at the end of the day, it must look like it's the ANC's government, which is the point, and which is the reason why I believe the cabinet is so bloated, which is the reason why we have two deputy ministers, I think, for half of the departments in the cabinet, and each deputy minister, at least one of them is an ANC and also a minister as well. So ultimately, it's a tactic used by Ramaphosa to bring about the kumbaya feeling towards everyone to make them feel as though everyone is involved, everyone is going to help each other, everyone is unified. But really, it's about letting others eat and also allowing the ANC to eat as well. So, guys, look, we eating, let you also eat as well. But at the same time, don't forget that this is our government. And such was the case when we look at Gauteng and how Panyaza was able to set that up to his favor and to his government's favor, which he then capitulated or rather conceded that we cannot give power away because then after that we will lose power for the next election. So, ultimately the tactic is really, to maintain the status quo. It's not going to be, and Martin's right, we have to bring in, as classical liberals and people on the center right, a different view and push that narrative as much as we can. But it's going to take time because we have people like Ramaphosa pushing a narrative of bigger government, everyone eats, and everyone is happy and kumbaya. So, yeah.
Even as you're saying this, you're bringing me to my second question, because I was going to ask the question, who benefits from a government being this large? Is it really as the left and the center left to tell us, oh no, they'll say, this is totally for the people. Every time you see a government department or a government agency or a committee of government or indeed any other sphere of the state expand in this way, it's because they'll say it's responding to a need of the people. That wonderful euphemism that is often used as an excuse for everything in the state. And of course, the people supposedly don't mind, Martin, their money just being extracted at rates of 45% and more in taxes, and that's not including municipal rates and levies. So overall, there was a study, an opinion piece rather, done by the late Mike Schussler, rest in peace to the homie, who was a very renowned economist in this country, indicating that South African taxpayers, or South Africans generally, are some of the most highly taxed people in the world. As much as 60% plus of your income disappears from your pockets and goes into the pockets of politicians. Now, who benefits is that question I just want to circle back to from this. Is it really the people or is it the state? Now, Martin, before you jump in here, I did want to put on screen an article I was referencing that basically quoted the minister in the presidency, Ntshavheni, that's Khumbudzo, Ntshavheni, minister in the presidency, another ANC fat cat who made her way back into the echelons of senior power as a minister in the presidency. The fudge that's supposed to be, but nonetheless, let me put it up on screen. I want to read a choice quote here from her that really just represents that Will Smith slap on the face of South Africans. Just give me a second, guys, to put it up on screen. And whilst I'm doing that, if you're just joining us, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. We're going to be on your screens for the next, let's call it, an hour at best, discussing effectively the bloated state of this cabinet. Are you happy seeing this cabinet being big? Maybe you're a DA supporter or an IFP supporter, and you're just happy to see your guy in government, you might say, and you don't really mind, therefore, the cost of it all. Maybe you're that person. Let me know in the comments what you think. Remember, as always on Liberty and Friends, your comments and questions will be flighted on screen, so get those in, please, as you do. Now, as you can see on screen there, as it loads up, there she is, the minister in the presidency. Under the headline, Ntshavheni blames the electorate, that's you, for a new cabinet bill. There she is, looking rather, I don't know, like Badger from the wood in the willows there. Minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, has blamed the electorate, she says, for the inflation of cabinet expenses to more than R1 billion in the 7th administration. Yes, you heard that right. R1 billion for these 33 or 31 ministers at the moment. As she was speaking to the media, she was quoted as having said, if government work has to be done, government work has to be done. Wow, Khumbudzo, that's fascinating insight. Now that we have a strong command of the obvious there, she goes on to say, the electorate chose an outcome that landed us in a government of national unity, she says, and there is a need for quote-unquote inclusivity. So the electorate will have to accept the responsibility that what they gave us, as if we chose the cabinet, for us to make lemonades out of lemons. There is a cost to it, and that cost will have to be carried. It's the new normal, end of quote. Now, Unchaveni is being cheeky here, as I said. She says this as if cabinet was super small before and efficient, and now that we, the electorate, the naughty electorate, Martin, voted in these extra opposition politicians, we're to blame for Cyril Ramaphosa having the sole prerogative. Let me repeat that. Cyril Ramaphosa had the sole prerogative to decide how big his cabinet is, but we're to blame for him choosing to expand this cabinet. My God, are they not being absolute assholes to us?
No, I mean, it's a logical fallacy. It simply doesn't follow. The fact that she kind of and her team sat around thinking that they were making a smart point when they said, oh, well, let's just kind of spin this and say that, well, they voted for a lot of parties and now we have to have coalition governments, and ergo, now it means we have to have these huge bloated cabinets. This doesn't happen elsewhere in the world where coalition politics are the norm. I mean, she said there, this is the new normal. It's like this has been normal for some time all around the world, and none of those governments felt the need to explode the size of their cabinet. I mean, they took the size of the cabinet as it was, and they divided the positions up proportionately to their coalition partners. Now, the ANC is unwilling to do that. That's the problem here, which goes unsaid from her perspective, at least. The ANC is not willing to say, oh, geez, okay, we only have, 15 ministers. That means, damn it, we're going to have to kind of have some trade-off. So we have to give up Minister of Finance, or we have to give up Minister of Defense. The ANC is not willing to have that type of kind of discourse with itself. It would rather say, no, we'll keep the defense, we'll keep finance, we'll keep trade and industry. Oh, geez, we have to include these other guys. So let's create some random new kind of ministries and throw them in there. I mean, that is perverse. That's completely ridiculous. And you asked who benefits. I mean, clearly the ANC ultimately benefits here. There is never been a time in South Africa's democratic history, and maybe even before that you could say, well, the people here voted for big government. That's just never been the case, because our democracy has never really been that deep. South Africans have never really voted based on policy. I mean, all of these parties had these huge manifestos before the election, and I would be very surprised if even a fraction of the electorate even glanced at the manifesto of the party that they voted for. I certainly didn't. I didn't read the manifesto of the party that I voted for, so I'm sure no one else did either. So to say that South Africans went out there and chose big government, it simply doesn't follow. The reality is, I'm simplifying it, how the modern state came to be is a very complicated story with extremely kind of varied factors. But ultimately, if you think about private security regulation, that's something that the private security industry, big business, lobbied for. If you think about transport regulation, that's something that big businesses in the transport industry lobbied for hundreds of years ago, decades ago. So that's where big government, to a very large extent, comes from rent seeking. I mean, Frederick Bastiat, a classical liberal hero, he pointed this out about 1850, that you get big government because the wealthy want to rent seek. And this isn't me saying that the rich are to blame, but rather that there are forces in the private sector, and certainly in South Africa as well, which seek to use the government to their benefit. And the government is very comfortable with this. The government is in its element when that happens, because then it creates this momentum for bureaucratic expansion. And every single bureaucracy, even if it's a private sector one, has an incentive to protect its domain, to grow. This is not supposed to happen in the public sector, but it does. And we've written constitutions to try and stop that, but it hasn't helped. But yeah, it ultimately benefits that political class, that class of politicians and their private sector kind of cronies, who they benefit through protection. And you'll find that with every single ministry that we have. We have 32 ministers now. You'll find underlying each of them, there is some protected vested interest. And it's certainly not of the ordinary person. This government is costing not only the taxpayer a lot of money, but even those people who don't yet qualify to pay income tax, everything is getting more expensive for them because of the protectionism that we get from DTI for imports, through the compliance burden that the Department of the Environment represents upon farmers and so forth. The list just goes on. And ultimately, everyone has to pay either directly or indirectly for big government. And if you can cut that, and the Free Market Foundation has proposed various specific cuts to how that could happen, you simply end up with a cheaper government, and that means an economy that has room to breathe.
Even as you're saying this, let me just make sure I'm not muted here. Testing 1, 2. Even as you're saying this, I'm very mindful of this. You've raised 2 economic principles there, which I want to just quickly talk about before we get to what the Free Market Foundation, for example, advocated should have been what happened from this government of national unity process insofar as the size of government. The FMF saying it should have shrunk down and gave recommendations. We'll get to that in a moment. But there's 2 economic principles that I need to flesh out here for the benefit of our viewers so that they can be armed with these same arguments that we often make. Number 1, it's this idea that, as is the topic of the show, that government costs you money. It isn't just the cost that we can physically see by way of, a number of government employees who need to be paid salaries, all the government infrastructure and the politicians, blah, blah, blah. Yes, that costs money, but also the decisions they make, which use government force, the same government force that you can't opt out of, cost you money. So when some official, as Martin rightly pointed out, from the Environmental Affairs Department comes to a farmer and says, well, actually, or the Water Affairs Department says, well, actually, you must use X amount of water, and now we're going to introduce race, affirmative action in BE on issues of water licenses, that costs you money as a farmer, because on the one hand, you need to now pay the money to comply with those new regulations, and it affects your business, which might make you less profitable. So it's a silent tax through legislation and regulation that often people don't see, but it has an impact on you, the consumer, at the end of the day, as Martin rightly pointed out. The other cost, of course, is most people often ask why, Big Daddy Liberty, why do you say you are not pro-business? We thought you were a libertarian. We thought you were a classical liberal. Liberals always talk about business this, business that. No. I often make this distinction that as a classical liberal, I'm pro-markets and not pro-business, because the very same business people, big business in particular, have no problem supporting laws that hurt us in the market if that law benefits them. Let me be precise and specific, and Nzuzo, I'm going to throw it to you in a moment. Think about the NHI, the National Health Insurance, which is a policy the government, the ANC in particular, has put in place, and a law now, which says all healthcare funding will be taken from private hands, business hands, basically anybody, including the state allocated money for health, will be now put into one big pot called the NHI fund. And that fund will be controlled by politicians, and who they decide as a committee should decide where healthcare spending should be. So that, basically it becomes the ESCOM of healthcare in this country. That law, which you would think the medical aid businesses in this country would fight tooth and nail, some of them were the biggest cheerleaders for it. And why? Because some of them thought that they would benefit from it because they'll get the tender to run that NHI fund, and of course, shut out their competitors at the same time. So big business is not your friend necessarily. Free markets are. That's an important distinction I just want to flesh out that Martin touched on here. And it's why that we as voters, because that's how we were blamed by government, should be very quick not to be dribbled. Hashtag don't be dribbled by these politicians. I want to come to you because there's one more principle here at play before I get to the Free Market Foundation and their recommendations. There is an appetite, not just in South Africa, but even across the world. I'll cite 2 examples. I'm hoping you may have paid attention to them. Of if money is short, right? Those politicians don't think, you know what, maybe we need to scale back our spending, scale back our size so that we don't burden our citizens who are clearly struggling. Hence, we as government are not collecting revenue because these people are struggling. Because remember, government's money comes from people. Politicians never say that. They never say, oh no, we are the ones who must be scaling back so that people can actually make more money. They say, no, we'll tax you more. Why am I raising this question to you, Nzuzo? Let's look at what happened in Kenya over the past few months, and it's still happening right now, where the politicians there, under pressure and heavily indebted, decided to introduce a new tax to the public. And the voting public in Kenya said, to hell with that. There were violent riots to the point where finally politicians kind of walked it back because really the blood count was getting very high. But that case example for me was symptomatic generally of how politicians operate. They don't tighten their belts, as they often say in budget speeches. They just put the cost on us.
Yeah, CJ, you are correct, 100% correct. Taking the case study in Kenya and the reaction from the public, I think that we mustn't we mustn't always see that type of reaction as the way we should go. I think that one should actually do what we should have done on the 29th of May and vote for the people who promote limited government, which, as I said previously, that's a narrative that as classical liberals we need to push. But definitely, every single time government sees a problem in terms of debt, the debt that it needs to pay off, it'll always raise taxes. It'll always raise fees that you have to pay for licensing, for medical aid schemes. They'll increase for example, in my own field, being the legal profession, like at the master of the high court, you need to pay even higher fees, higher tariffs to get certain administrative matters done by that entity of the court. So it's a number of ways in which government uses to increase their income, whilst at the same time trying to pay off debts which they incurred through having to increase the bloated cabinet which we have now, try to bring in new policies or schemes in which obviously they're trying to use to get more votes, but ultimately only found ourselves having to having to be at a disadvantage by having to pay more debt, more money to people who are taking out or giving us debt. I think that at the end of the day, as the public, we need to push for more limited government. We need to see when the government is pulling the wool over our eyes by saying, look, this is for us. We need to, like, for example, ESCOM, the debt that was taken out for that was for us. Instead of actually just opening up the market, making it much more easier to operate within that market, no, they said let's take out more debt so that we can fix ESCOM, which is not to their benefit, and which I don't believe that just because we have 100 days of load shedding, it will continue as such. But in any event, putting that to the side, having seen what happened in Kenya, yes, what the government did there was truly, in my opinion, unlawful, because it's really taxation is theft. And I believe that the reaction, taking into account that there has been no economic growth in Kenya, people are unemployed, that was going to be the reaction, especially when you have a bloated government that they have. I mean, they have even their own wives, spouses are getting benefits, which I've never even heard in my life for a government. So the reaction was correct. I think that the reaction from that population was correct, and they did take a step back, being the government. But I believe that it's gonna come in other ways. Don't get it twisted. I think that it's gonna come in other ways. Increases in fees, taxes, in other import duties, whatever whatever they can possibly do, they'll do, because they also have pressure from the IMF to pay off these debts. And without paying off these debts, things become much more expensive. Even the Rolls Royces that they buy become more expensive. The fuel that has to go into their Rolls Royces become more expensive. Things that they have to buy, though they're relying on the public to buy these things do become expensive, and it also hurts them. But ultimately, it will always hurt the the taxpayer, and as take into account what happened in Kenya, I am in support of the population and what they did. And I think that we need to look carefully and look at every single line item in the budget and make sure that that's something that indicates that there's going to be a cut in expenditure, at least in the national government, and trickling down to the and just one last thing, seeing what has happened in Joburg, which is very very shocking, that they've increased. I think they just added a surcharge, which I don't even know where that comes from, where it's gonna go. How does that help the situation? Because when I looked at the budget for Joburg, the infrastructure budget has not increased substantially, meaning that the infrastructure that's supposed to be upgraded in and around the municipality, from electrical wires, from water infrastructure, that is not going to be at all attended to by this municipality, but rather it's going to increase the expenditure in terms of employment of more people. I hear now that they're trying to actually insource more workers.
I think I may have lost Nzuzo there.
So I'm back.
Nzuzo, are you back? Yeah.
Yes.
They were trying to insource the workers. You want to finish that point?
Yeah, they're trying to insource workers, particularly bus workers, after the strike that has occurred a couple of weeks ago. And as a result, that's one of the areas in which they're trying to boost up the finances, which is the money for salaries. So just taking that into account, in conclusion, the government is always going to look to increase taxes some way or another. They're going to come up with some way to add a surcharge which comes out of nowhere. There's no rational reason. And in my opinion, that's why I say it's unlawful, because when you implement a policy, it has to be rational. It has to take into account the members of the public, which I believe has not been done so in this respect. And so I believe that we need to look at every line item in that budget that's coming up, I think, in the midterm budget, and we must look at the expenditure in totality as organizations like the FMF, classical liberals, and everyone else, to make sure that civil society in totality must make sure that every single line item is for purposes of infrastructure, the taxpayers, ensuring that we alleviate the poverty and we address poverty, and ensure that we also address unemployment, amongst other things, and not to give Ramaphosa a Rolls Royce.
Absolutely. Even as we're saying that, we have hit just over the 30-minute mark. We're in the last 30 minutes of the show. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. My name is Sihle Wabese, in conversation with Martin from Staden from the Free Market Foundation and Nzuzo Kathi from the ManPatria Podcast. Welcome to it. We're going to start putting your questions and comments up on screen. I can see the comment sections are very, very lively, rightly so, because this is an issue that affects you. We're not just talking abstractly about these issues. There are going to be serious impacts on your wallet over the next 5 years. And indeed, it's tax season for a lot of us provisional tax folks. We're already seeing those big chunks falling off our income statements. Welcome to it. Remember, hit the like button whether you're watching on Facebook, X, or on YouTube. And if it is YouTube, subscribe to the channel. And of course, visit us at our website at bigdaddyliberty.com. Guys, even as I'm saying this, it's not all doom and gloom by way of, some of these organizations Nzuzo has pointed out that we've spoken about here, the Free Market Foundation, perhaps. I'm really latching onto them because they've been most vocal on this particular issue. But again, they're not saying anything that other organizations and even citizens have been saying in the past. Government is too expensive in this country. It's costing us, especially those of us who are the more productive segments of society, who could be doing more, had we been given the opportunity to spend our own money that we seed via taxes. We could be doing more. More people could be employed, more business opportunities could be opened up in this country. But no, we're giving this money to fat cat politicians for them to effectively blow and waste in most cases. Let me put this up on screen. Bear with me, gentlemen. It's from the Free Market Foundation's website. Please make sure you visit them at freemarketfoundation.com. It's just give me a second here as I try and share the damn screen. There we go. With them effectively saying, cut the cabinet and shelve the NHI. There it is. Cut cabinet and shelve the NHI. Treasury's budget, they say, are an opportunity, not a crisis, says the MFMF. I am on the wrong page, but it's still the same message. There's a more recent press release that they did. Let me just get this off screen for a second. Apologies, dear viewer. But Martin, even as I'm doing that, maybe speak to some of the points that you guys were making at the Free Market Foundation, because I do think they were super important insofar as making the case that this government of national unity process should have included a conversation, a stern negotiation around cutting the size of government and reforming the state generally speaking, aside from just the horse trading for positions. Martin?
Yeah, thanks. So just let me make a point that touches on what Nzuzo was saying and what the people in the comments are actually discussing right now, and that is that effectively you cannot reducing the size of government is a very rare occasion, as opposed to increasing the size of government, which happens every single day, every week, every month. And that's kind of by design. The factors that work in favor of each thing are very different. Now, it's only really during constitutional moments, what we call them in jurisprudence, that you really have this opportunity to cut the size of government. That happened at the end of apartheid when we had this huge bloated state and we had a constitutional moment, and then we had a far smaller and leaner state. Yet, since then, the state has been growing, and every time someone like the Free Market Foundation asks for it to be cut, there will always be an excuse. And I maintain that even if, for instance, the Democratic Alliance was elected to an absolute majority of parliament, it also would find it extremely difficult to go to kind of its interest stakeholders and say, okay, we're getting rid of the Department of Sport, because you can just think there's going to be a crowd of people who are going to say my sport association can only exist because I get this 50,000 rand subsidy every week, every month, every year for it to exist. And you can't take this away from me. Please look at the tears that are coming out of my eyes. The chances of that then happening is very small. I mean, this past week, I said that, okay, we have a Minister of Public Works now from the DA. They are against the Expropriation Act, the new Expropriation Act that allows EWC. Obviously, the minister must now kind of get rid of it. And basically, everyone from that establishment said that, I mean, are you insane, Martin? That will rock the boat. It will rock the boat. So I just wanted to make that point that it's very easy to say, well, let's establish this department or this agency or this program, and let's try it out. Let's see if it works. And then if it doesn't work, we'll get rid of it. It does not work out that way. You're going to see it doesn't work like most of our government, and you're going to keep it. That's the perspective that we as liberals bring to the table, and that is to say that the scope of government is fixed in society. It has only one role, and that is a very defined role, and you can't go beyond that. And that's the message that we project out there, and that's what makes people very angry when we say that, because they say we're not pragmatic. But I think that's actually the most pragmatic perspective that one can have in the midst of these huge government bureaucracies. But just specifically to what the FMF has proposed, and that is, we said very simply, you can cut the 30 plus minister cabinet to 10 ministries only. What we did there very simply is we looked at the constitution, the supreme law of the country, and asked, what departments in cabinet does the constitution actually require? And the answer is, well, not 32 departments. It's even less, even fewer than 10, I would argue. But to fit in kind of some of the implicit constitutional mandates, we said that it is very practical, it's very conceivable for this government to be able, within the bounds of the Constitution. We're not amending the Constitution. This is not changing the paradigm. Within the current Constitution, to cut it down to 10 ministries. And there you have it on screen. It's the presidency, and we would propose you collapse the deputy president into that, so he loses his own his whole bureaucracy that supports him, and he has to share that with his president. The finance department, very important. Defense, international relations, justice, home affairs, and we would place the Department of Police and the Department of Correctional Services under home affairs, where it is in other countries, only aspects of it, and we will devolve to the provinces and the municipalities other aspects of police and correctional services. Then there's cooperative governance, intergovernmental relations, the public service, public works, and this would be a big one because it would then subsume transport, electricity, water and sanitation, agriculture, forestry and fisheries, and again, only aspects of them that relate to very necessary public works aspects. And then finally, social development, which would then include employment and labor and forestry and fisheries, only those regulatory aspects that you might conceivably think should be handled by the central government. And also, if you think about health, where's the Department of Health? We would also put some of those aspects under social development and even education if necessary. But then, of course, we would say devolve some of this, employment and labor, police, basic education, give that to the provinces. There's already bureaucracies at the provincial level, and simply empower them to do more. It won't all be moonshine and roses. Of course, we know how incapable our governments are at those levels, but it's time for them to start taking responsibility. Then we'll consolidate health, police, water and sanitation, transport, electricity, deputy president, planning, monitoring and evaluation into existing departments. And then the most fun, of course, and the most impactful for South Africans is to scrap some of these departments. Women and youth, persons who have disabilities. I mean, it has not solved a single problem for women, youth, and persons with disabilities in this country. So get rid of it. The land reform department is a rent-seeking department that keeps the temperature of our politics extremely high by radicalizing and engaging and giving legitimacy to a lot of these redistributionist sentiments. That needs to simply go. The agriculture aspect of it, as I said before, can be either devolved or it can be consolidated into public works. Mineral resources and energy, I think government has done enough for mining and electricity in this country, so I think they've done enough and we can get rid of it. Communications and digital technologies, this is something that the government never should have been involved in. We've long argued at the FMEB that spectrum should be a tradable asset on the market. It shouldn't be subject to any kind of government veto. Public enterprises will always have public enterprises, but they should be housed within the department that kind of is in their portfolio. They shouldn't be under this new super department. Trade, industry, and competition. Again, I think they've done enough for trade and industry and competition in South Africa. I think they can stop whatever they're doing now. Let the private sector, let ordinary South Africans, communities, and businesses start looking after the business environment because we're just better at it than government. Forestry and fisheries, again, same story. Higher education, my goodness, there is no basis in the Constitution for us to have a department of propaganda for higher education. That is ridiculous that such a thing exists. Universities should just be allowed to be universities out there. I'm not sure why the government is involved in higher education. You can make an argument for basic education, and I would disagree with you on that argument, but at least you can make an argument. Sports, arts and culture, that speaks for itself. I think our sports personalities, our artists, and our people involved in culture are better at those things than the government is. Tourism would also need to go. I think our communities can market themselves perfectly well. And human settlements, it had a few good years after the end of apartheid, but it's now had just bad years. I think the building of public housing has basically stopped at some point, and allowing South Africans to build their own housing is, of course, also completely out of the question because regulation and the nanny state would always get the preference there. So the necessary aspects of that go to public works, we would say, but ultimately just allow South Africans to build their own housing and give them title deeds. And this can all be done, as I said, within the bounds of the Constitution. There is nothing paradigm shifting about this. It is almost entirely, as you alluded to earlier, within the discretion of the president, how big his cabinet needs to be. In theory, he can have a cabinet of one because the Constitution refers to the member of cabinet responsible for finance, the member of cabinet responsible for police, the member of cabinet responsible for cooperative governance. And that member of cabinet can be just one guy and he's responsible for everything. So in theory, you can have a very lean cabinet and it can be perfectly constitutional. But what we're seeing, and I only realized this about a year ago, is that our separation of powers in South Africa is so weak that the president could make every member of parliament a minister or a deputy minister. Now think about that for a moment. He could collapse the whole legislature into the executive. I mean, currently 1 out of every 5 members of parliament sits in the executive, and the president could make that 100% of parliament. So we have a very powerful presidency that is allowed to expand and retract cabinet to his heart's content. And we've now seen, by him creating the biggest government, I think, amongst developing nations in our peer group, that he's very willing to do that. And we at the Free Market Foundation say, listen, there's no reason for us to accept this. This is not normal. This is not healthy. Here is a route for us to get out of this. Of course, they didn't listen, but we're gonna keep saying this, and hopefully in 2029, when the ANC invariably loses more of its support, maybe the coalition that spurts out of that election would see some sense.
Yeah, no, that has been, even as we were doing the watch party on this channel, as watching the president, now announces various ministers of this, ministers of that. It went on for so long that at some point I cracked a joke and said, clearly everybody's becoming a minister. I'm about to hear the minister of my left nutsack is so-and-so. Everybody seemed to get a ministry position. It's ridiculous, and really it speaks to the economic illiteracy sometimes that characterizes or drives a lot of this idea that every element or every facet of activity, economic, political, and social, needs some form of political overlord by way of a minister is toxic thinking. And Nzuzo, I want to throw it to you because I'm seeing some very interesting comments coming in here. And one question that often will be thrown out, Nzuzo, is this notion of, well, what about the poor? They'll say, the poor need government. Now obviously there's an element, a small grain of truth to that. The poor, and I'll argue in a more extended sense, citizens do need some functions from the state. The maintenance of law and order, the administration of justice, protecting the public from foreign aggression. Of course, the state can play a role in that. But there's often this patronizing argument in Nzuzo that's made, often citing the poor as though to say, poor people can't do anything on their own. They need these politicians, man, in order to even breathe, to remind themselves to breathe in, breathe out. They need politicians. That's the sort of condescending argument you'll sometimes hear from our detractors and really the left.
No, agreed. Yeah, and it's always funny how the ones that are trying to push their narratives are the ones that are destroying the very functions on which the poor rely on, such as health. We've seen when you go to government hospitals that some services are poorly managed, infrastructure is not attended to, there is no maintenance, and people are literally lying in the corridors of the hospitals waiting for some sort of service or some sort of medical care, which is not being given because there's either a shortage of medical workers, there's not enough beds, there's not enough rooms, there's not enough infrastructure, there's not enough equipment. So when the question is asked, what about the poor? No, the poor has already felt the neglect of the government when the government has insisted on trying to take more power. As we've seen in health, we've seen that in policing, we've also seen that in human settlements. Not really, the government has not assisted the poor, even though it has grown over the last 30 years. I think that the poor will be assisted by taxpayers' money going to them directly by way of vouchers for purposes of healthcare and also schooling. Vouchers are actually just passed. For when I pay my taxes, it goes straight into the bank accounts of the poor who may not be able to afford those services, and rather than having to go through a whole plethora of levels of bureaucracy, having starting with the national government to the provincial. And Martin's right.
That's
I
right.
think that certain competency can be done by the provincial government, such as health as well as education. There's no need for a department of education or health at the national level. It's really just the provincial, because
Absolutely.
of course every province has its own situation to face. So nonetheless, the point is that the poor will not be assisted by more government. The poor will be assisted by those who have money to pay their taxes, and then those taxes are filtered into their bank accounts, and they can make use of that through paying for services like healthcare, security, as well as education. But more government will not assist them in any way possible.
Absolutely. I mean, you've raised the most important aspect that I wanted us to finish on in the last 10 minutes of the show. Nzuzo rightly pointing out something I often say, which is this. Of course, poor people need help. And of course, government has a role to play in that. But the government doesn't necessarily need to supply that help directly. It doesn't need to do that said help that the quote-unquote poor need. What do we mean by this? Often as classical liberals, we try and flesh out the idea that, okay, fine, you can't scrap government, you can't sort of apply shock treatment and dismantle the state, tomorrow and expect that things will be stable in a society like ours, where people have grown very accustomed to be dependent on that state. You have to wean people off slowly in a reform manner, and not in a revolutionary manner. That's one of the big differences between people like us. We're pro-reform, gradualism, as I've heard Martin use that expression before, versus revolutionary theory that you often hear the politicians talk in that sort of comrade accent. Accents have been a big issue this week. Look out for me this week. I'm going to attack this issue of, are you black enough because of your accent in a certain way? Anyway, I digress. What do we mean by this? I hear what Martin is saying. I hear what the Free Market Foundation is saying. I agree with that. I would perhaps be even more extreme insofar as collapsing, eradicating departments. I would create one department. So instead of having a Department of Education, Health, and this and that, I would collapse all of that and create a very small, singular department called the Department of Enabling Opportunities, which will include health, education, human settlements, yada, yada, yada. And it literally only has a handful of employees, people who just disperse funds as they receive them from SARS. And all those people will be doing is, because government has the data, if you are a South African who falls under a certain income level or are indigent, so don't worry about the rest of South Africa, only those who need the actual help. Those individuals will be receiving vouchers for them to be able to purchase healthcare, education, or even put aside as a once-off money for building material to build their own home. That way you have a situation where, yes, the state is playing some role to assist, but the state is not required to physically dole out that service. Often, which, as Nzuzo rightly says, is costly, has to go through multiple layers of bureaucracy, which in and of themselves are costly, so that by the time you get to the actual service that is needed by the quote-unquote poor, it's effectively, it doesn't have the money on the one hand, and its quality is severely inferior. So what you really want to do, therefore, is to cut out that middleman as the state that provides the service, look to the private sector, civil society to provide that service, and empower the poor with vouchers for them to be able to purchase those very same services like we do in the middle class. So a health voucher, for example, which allows the poor person to shop around, find a medical aid that they can afford, and have medical insurance. Equally, on education, you can set up a policy of school choice powered by education vouchers. where the choice is supplied by a free market in entrepreneurs or even religious institutions that want to start schools, and they can attract you with your education voucher by effectively competing for your business. That's the kind of society that creates enabling opportunities for poor people, as opposed to what can the government do to quote unquote do things for people. Guys, we're in that last stretch, the last sort of 5 minutes. We have last comments coming up here. Martin, perhaps now sell us a vision of, from your perspective, from perhaps the Free Market Foundation's perspective, a South Africa that can be. What does it look like, and what sort of ideas should the public who are watching the stream be fighting for in this next 5 years? To which, underlining that, is what we always say: do not be dependent on politicians. You've got to be self-sufficient over the next 5 years. Don't believe that even this GNU will come and save us. No one's coming to save us. So what should the ideas be that people fight for? Martin?
Yeah, I think the key thing, Sigle, is that people need to start connecting theory and reality. That is, what I mean by that is that the government hasn't helped. So in 9 out of 10 cases, the people who were poor 10 years ago are still the people who are poor today. And in that span of time, the government has expanded and tried to do much more. It hasn't worked. Now they're clinging on to this idea that no, but we have to government harder, and then it will work. That simply is a fantasy. And what that needs to be replaced with, once this realization sets in that, listen, actually it's not going to work. There is no money, there is no competence, whatever the reason. There are hundreds of reasons why it is not going to work, and there is very few why it could work. Once that sets in, a very liberating kind of thing sets in with most people. And that is this idea that actually I am responsible. I am responsible for my lot in life. I am poor, or I'm having a difficult time at work, or whatever your issue is, whatever your problem is. Ultimately, it is your responsibility to solve that problem. That doesn't mean that you are to blame for the problem existing. You are probably not to blame, but you are responsible to solve that problem. And once you realize that, a very deep and I think almost euphoric sense of freedom comes over most sensible people. And that is that there are many options open to me to start solving this problem, provided, of course, that I am allowed to take those options, to take those routes, to go down that path, to solve my problem. Responsibility needs to be allowed. Responsibility is currently almost completely, and it's not only in South Africa, but almost completely disallowed, because we have, for the last 200 or so years, created the welfare state. And the welfare state, the premise of the welfare state all around the world is you are no longer responsible, the government is now responsible. Or, as they like to say, society and the community is responsible, but that's a euphemism for the government is responsible for whatever your lot is. And when I was younger, when I was a radical libertarian, a lot of people said to me, you keep talking about liberty, but what about responsibility? And what I thought they were saying was, no, we can't have too much freedom. We actually have to focus on the duties that people have towards each other. And I completely misunderstood that. Actually, responsibility it's the door to freedom. If you must be allowed to fail, you must be allowed to fail completely at what it is at life. Because if that is the case, then you are free. If you are indeed allowed to fail. And we as a society have said that actually failure is not an option. And the result of that is this net that they call it a social safety net, but it's actually a net that we're all stuck in. And it's a net that is dragging us down and drowning us. And we as the Free Market Foundation and many other classical liberal organizations in South Africa around the world are saying, listen, it's time for people starting with the individual, but then extending to the family, extending to the business, and extending to the community. To start just saying, listen, actually, I am responsible. We are responsible. And whatever the problem is, the solutions are out there. There's nothing new under the sun. You Google it and it's there. The solutions are there, and we need to be allowed to do it. And even if we aren't allowed to do it, we're going to do it anyway. So that's kind of the message that I think people should go away with. That is the liberal future that we all would benefit from.
And I think there's a solid messaging in that, which, insofar as us as the classical liberals, the libertarians, the anarchists, the conservatives, should not just be preaching this on our shows, as we don't. I'm not saying that's not the accusation I'm throwing, but we shouldn't be in our ivory towers also. We should be heading out into communities and making these very arguments. So actually no one is coming to save you. You are responsible for what you as an individual, and really we talk a lot about the individual, but really, Martin, we're a family society. And insofar as we point out the individuals, rightly so, we're talking about how individuals care and do things often for the benefit of family, that we are responsible for our future. No Ramaphosa, no John Steenhuisen, no Julius Malema is coming to save you. Nzuzo, even as I throw it to you, Brazo, for your final take, that message of responsibility, critically important, but also the message of, decision making, like the decisions we make as South Africans, by God, we need to start paying attention to the decisions we make because they actually impact us, and not expect to make bad decisions and pass the cost on to someone else. What we call the moral hazard in economics, something government has become very accustomed to doing. They fuck up on something, excuse my language, and then because they know, they'll always be able to pass the cost on to someone else. Eskom is a good example where it doesn't provide electricity, but every year we'll get a nice fat 25% increase in the tariffs. Again, passing the F up, again, apologies for the language for viewers, to someone else. We've got to end that culture of impunity and the moral hazard.
Yeah, I agree so wholeheartedly. And who I direct my frustrations at purely is when we talk in the context of what you just touched on is organizations, or the tripart organization of NETLAC, being government, labor, as well as what you might call it, big business. They cannot, they will never subject themselves to the nature of the market, which is you fuck up, you fail. If you fail at your product or service, another guy will take your spot, and he's going to also try his best to learn from your mistakes. If you're not a good union and you do not protect the rights of your workers within the context of what the law allows, and which I would assume that law does not impose more and more restrictions on employers, I think that then you must fail as a union. Same with government. If you cannot deliver on the programs which you have insisted on, then you must fail. But yet we have a government that, in partnership with big business as well as big labor, tend to believe that they are the gods of society. They are the gods. They're the ones that control us, and they must avoid by any means possible failing, which ultimately we can see that they're doing nonetheless. They're failing. They're failing to increase poor people out of poverty. They're failing to increase, even in big business, they're failing to improve their services. Take a Lot has seen that with the introduction of Amazon. They failed to improve their services or products, and they have to obviously be subject to the market. So is government. ANC failed at the polls, and so they have to deal with the coalition. So ultimately, in as much as people might fear that, when you take responsibility for your life, shit will go ham. Maybe it will, but nonetheless, you cannot subject other people to your failures. You cannot expect a populace which is continuously at 4 a.m. someone who's waking up as traveling from Soshanguve to Central Pretoria and putting in their money into the actual, putting their money in for transport, whilst you are being driven around, yet you're failing on your part. You're not delivering. I think that it's fair enough to get that person out and bring someone else into the fray and take their position. So I am big on more liberty, more responsibility, and less government. I think that that's a necessity. I think that within that realm, there's a lot that South Africa can do, it can become. And I believe that within that sort of situation, sky's the limit. But what we have now is a total nanny state. It's frustrating. It doesn't take us anywhere, and it's taxing. I mean, when looking at my pay slip, I fucking can't believe it that I'm fucking paying so much money at a national level. There's still municipal level taxes that I have to pay, and yet I'm not getting anything in return. So I believe that we need to.
It hurts to see that chunk go off the salary. Yeah, you're saying sorry.
Agreed. It really hurts. And as someone who tries to each and every month pay his taxes, I expect in return something that works. I would love to take the public PRASA to hop on a PRASA train to get to work. That will allow me to actually live closer to my parents and my family. But because there's no such service such as that, I have to literally try to live closer, pay higher rent, crazy amount of municipal taxes as well as national taxes, but I'm not getting anything in return. So please, as libertarians, I think that we should not be ashamed of what we push or what we believe in. I think that it's necessary for us to thrive as a society, and we should continuously, and that's why I never voted for people like DA, because I believe that in their hearts of us, they believe in big government. They believe in increasing the cabinet, and in and as much they might say, "Oh my gosh, Cape Town is the best run." Well, in comparison to so many other towns that can't even deliver water. I mean, yeah, what can you say? But I've been to Cape Town and I'm not necessarily impressed at the manner in which it's run. There's too much nanny state, and I think that's going to be to their detriment. But nonetheless, my point is that limited government, more freedom, and more responsibility. So yeah, thank you for having me, Stephen.
Thank you very much to both my guests. That's Nzuzo Kathi from the ManPatria Podcast. Make sure you check them out, please. It's been a while since we've seen their content. I'm sure they'll be back roaring very soon. Shout out to Dumo Denga. And of course, Martin van Staden from the Free Market Foundation, our homies over there doing fantastic work. Again, preserving and fighting for your freedoms as South Africans. That's the Free Market Foundation at freemarketfoundation.com. I got that right. Yes, I'm right. That's thanks to Martin and Nzuzo. And again, thank you, dear viewers. I just want to leave you with the final word from my side. Guys, no one is coming to save you. I'm going to say that again. No one is coming to save you. You are your own. If you're someone who's like, yeah, Ramaphosa is going to save the day. Lead us, Ramaphosa. Ramaphosa Kaufela. Gosh, I hate it when I hear them sing that song. It's cringy when I hear people say this, or when people think John Steenhuisen or Helen Ziller, who we've had on the show, is going to come and save them and save South Africa or rescue South Africa. Guys, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work believing that EFF or MK, Jacob Zuma or Julius Malema are going to save you. You are on your own, and in you being on your own, there are only two things you can count on. Number one, yourself, your ability to grow your skills, grow your ability to look after your family, and number two, the people closest to you, your family and your community. If you don't build strong links with those individuals now, preparing for whatever South Africa's future will be, then you will be in a lot of trouble. And one of the things I like to say, and I'm increasingly going to tackle this issue more, is that there is nowhere in the world to run to anymore. The world is falling to pieces, again, because there is this embrace of bad ideas by way of social issues and cultural issues, and bad ideas by way of bad economic policies. So there's nowhere to run to. This is our home, whether you're white, black, Indian, or colored. This is our home. We need to make South Africa work. And part of doing that, as I said, building institutions of society that advocate for these good ideas, whether it's civil society organizations like the Free Market Foundation or the Institute of Race Relations, who I've partnered with, or AfriForum or Solidariteit. These are organizations that should be the go-to in preserving our rights, working towards preserving our rights, but also you, the individual, doing the exact same thing. We have nowhere to run to. So guys, stay tuned to the channel. We're going to be doing much more interesting stuff. I'm going to be hitting the streets once again, talking to you out in the public. You're going to start seeing me do a lot more advocacy work, persuading people to adopt ideas of free markets, liberty-oriented society, building up the family unit. A mama, a papa in the house looking after their children safe and secure in traditional family, since these are the ideas that I'll be fighting for, taking to the streets over the next 5 years. So that come the next election, we're going to see a much better breakup of pro-reform parties as opposed to these lefty, commie and socialist parties that unfortunately are still within the purview. But anyway, let me not waffle on. You let me know what you think about tonight's topic. Is South African government too bloated? Are you afraid, perhaps, as someone who's working? Are you going to see less in your paycheck because of Ramaphosa and his bloated ass cabinet? Or maybe you're someone who's happy. Hey, your favorite politician made it in, whether it's DA, IFP, or whatever, or PA, and you don't really mind the size of cabinet. But also, in me asking this question, do you think you derive benefit from a cabinet being this bloated, or even government, for that matter of fact? With that being said, thanks for watching. Super appreciated. This has been another episode of The Liberty and Friends. Remember, we come to you, broadly speaking, as a channel twice a week. Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. for the Big Daddy Liberty Show. And of course, Liberty and Friends, Sundays at 8 p.m. There will be more content. We're just scaling up again slowly. And with that being said, thank you guys in the chat, all the moderators. And as I always say, whether you're watching on X, Facebook, or YouTube, guys, hit that like button, please. Do me that solid favor. And don't forget, if you're watching on YouTube, to subscribe to the channel. And if you can, please, once it's up and ready, once again, if it isn't for gremlins, BigDaddyLiberty.com is where you'll find us, and you'll get more information around where the Big Daddy Liberty Mobile will be in the country. With that being said, thank you for watching. And as I always say at the end of every show, never trust a commie.